Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Marcel Proust said, "The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." Well, on today's episode, we talk about the importance of the relationship with oneself, gaining clarity and connecting to the work you are put here to do, the dark side of gratitude, your one last talk, and more. My guest is a husband and father, a speaker, a best-selling author, a philosopher, filmmaker, and coach who works with entrepreneurs, leaders, and athletes around the world who, in one form or another, want to live a more courageous life. He helps people connect with their truth, uncover their unique gifts, and use them to impact the world. Please welcome the man who believes the deeper we go, the higher we fly, Philip McKernan. Philip, it is great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. What a privilege.
Absolutely. Well, it is a privilege for me as well, and I am super excited about this conversation. So let's dive right in. I thought a good starting point would be for you to share with all of us what your favorite thing is about yourself and why.
Oh my God. Wow. If I knew that was going to be the starter, I would have said no to this. My favorite thing about myself, well, growing up as a young man, I didn't have a lot of confidence. I didn't particularly like who I was. I didn't have a lot of physical attributes that I liked, but actually the only thing I ever started to like or to kind of almost fall in love with was my eyes. And I would have chalked it down in a much more immature period of my life, just down to color or whatever. But in actual fact, what I've learned to love about eyes is they are literally the gateways to the soul. And I think that it is albeit a physical attribute that I'm referring to, but ultimately I think I've got a really well-intentioned soul and I care deeply for humanity. Sometimes my wife herself would say probably too much. I often want for people something that they cannot either envisage for themselves or even want for themselves, but yet they're capable. And deep, deep, deep down, it's exactly why they're on this planet. So I would say my eyes and what they represent.
I first of all, I love that response. I have never heard a response of that nature before from any other guest. Not that I ask this question every time, but I've never heard that specifically. And it's so interesting you say that because I hadn't heard you say that before. And the quote that I mentioned at the opening of the podcast, that Marcel Proust quote, I'm going to repeat that because I'd love to get your insights on what that quote means to you. Again, knowing what you just said. So the real
And it's funny,
voyage.
it's funny, Jay, because it sounds like we've kind of set this up. I had no idea you were going to ask me that question. And that's why you'll never hear me give that answer because I've never been asked that question. It's a beautiful question and one that caught me a little bit off guard, to be honest.
Well, it's very interesting, and I do my due diligence. Obviously, I research each guest, but I really had not heard that before. So the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. So when you hear that, what does that mean to you? How do you interpret that?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's I recorded a video this morning that I may or may not publish, well, maybe ever. I mean, I'll record videos sometimes that don't ever see the light of day, but essentially I talked about going back into our past, not living in our past, but going back into our past to begin to mine our origin stories in ways that perhaps most people actually don't do. And the context of this particular video is just talking about how often we don't want to be like one of our parents, and yet that's the very person on earth that we're most like. And if I'm at a workshop and I ask the question, who are you most like, your mom or your dad? And if someone says to me, well, I'm not like my father, there's probably a fairly high chance and indicator that's exactly who you've become or you're becoming. And doing the opposite is simply not enough. And what I encourage people to do is to go back into their past, albeit in a very contained, safe manner, to examine it with a different, fresh perspective and a different set of eyes based on who you are today, and begin to see how you've been formed at such a deep fundamental level and how you've got these patterns, micro patterns or significant patterns that continue to repeat themselves. And in actual fact, the mining of that story and the answer to why these patterns emerge is not in our present, and it's definitely not in our future, but it's often in our past. So when I go back into people's past, it's remarkable how often, as long as you bring them and you guide them, it's amazing. They go, "Oh wow, I never saw that before. I never saw it like that. I never saw that small little encounter or significant thing has really shaped my beliefs in positive and in ways that don't serve me anymore in my life." So that to me immediately brings up this idea of just looking back into our lives and examining our current lives with just a different set of eyes, and therefore a different perspective is really rich, as opposed to rushing out into the world and just trying to achieve more, assuming that'll make us happy, which it often doesn't.
Wow, that's incredible. That process of self-exploration and really looking at our past so we can discover more about what shaped how we think today, our beliefs, our biases, all of those things really it's an amazing process. And to have that mirror held up to you and really go deep to better understand that, it can be uncomfortable, but it's also an important discovery. And so I want to stay on that for a moment. I didn't know we were going to necessarily go to this topic at this moment, which is fine because this is how I love these conversations to develop and evolve. But the work that you do when you help someone go back and really look at where a lot of that stuff comes from, either the things that are empowering for them today or the things that don't serve them. The things that don't serve them well today, how are you, or what is the process to being able to unpack that and either reframe, change the story? What are the tools that can be used to help them become more empowered and let some of that negativity go so it doesn't block
Yeah.
them today?
Yeah, sometimes the tools are such an insignificant part of that puzzle, because the
Mm.
tools are often either one, very simple, or two, not even required. It's almost like when you go back and, for example, someone says, I'm struggling with sales and I'm struggling with, I'm not making enough money in my business or whatever. You go, great. So is that just sales, just the economy, just manpower? Is it just, something to do with the business? So absolutely. Well, what's your relationship to money like? I'm just using this as an example. Well, what do you mean my relationship to money? I mean, money is just a thing. Or they give you some line out of a book that sounds great. And then you start to delve into their relationship with money if they're open to it, and they realize that there is a dysfunctionality of their relationship to money, and they place money in either one too high or powerful place or not enough of a place. They don't respect it enough. And at some level, maybe they don't even want money, yet that would go against all of their intellect. You go back into their past and you help them understand their relationship to money in ways that served and in ways that doesn't serve. Sometimes, not always, just simply the awareness of understanding that actually their dysfunctional relationship with money was formed at a place where they didn't know how it was formed, and they now have a different perspective. And sometimes that simply breaks them through to give themselves permission to go, shit, I do deserve money. I can charge for money, and I should charge for money, and it's okay to charge for money. Other times it requires them to sit with the understanding intellectually and otherwise from the past, and then begin to map out how it's actually presenting itself today and where it is that it's showing up in positive ways and negative ways. Sometimes it requires them to take different actions. Sometimes it requires a conversation that perhaps they've been avoiding for a very long time. There's not a lot of complexity to it other than that. And also this idea of accepting that actually, because something is so deep rooted, I think one of the biggest tragedies for most people, Jay, is that they delve into their past or their present, they uncover something and they think, oh, it's gone. That pattern is gone. Now, I've had it for 45 years. I've had it for 50 years. I've had it for 35 years. But in that moment, it's gone. Poof. And you realize that actually it's not gone at all. So it's the process of dissolving some of it, integrating the fact that it's been ever present in my life, therefore it's probably going to continue, and being aware of it. So fast forward that I'm doing a real estate deal, or I'm about to work with a client and he's asked for a discount. And you go to yourself, knowing what I know about my dysfunctional relationship to money, scarcity, or whatever it is, my answer, is it coming from that place or is it coming from a more mature, informed place? So actually bringing it into the boardroom with you, bringing it into the negotiations rather than pretending you've forgotten about it or you've dealt with it. So it's a combination of being aware, integration, and then doing some natural things to begin to dissolve it so it doesn't control the narrative anymore. And that's the approach.
That is incredible. So is this the work that you're doing, is this something that you've been able to do from the time that you were a very young man? Are these skills that you developed? Is this something that was just part of your DNA and you discovered it over time? I'm just curious because this is obviously it takes a true not only gift and talent, but someone who can deeply see inside someone else's eyes, someone else's soul, ask incredible questions, deep, meaningful questions that are able to pull that type of information out in such a way that there's emotion attached to it so you can begin to see change and transformation happen. So when did all of this begin for you?
It's a great question, and it's a tough one to answer, I'll be honest with you. But I think to some extent, I was quite intuitive when I was a young man in this world, and people used to come to me, and older adults used to come to me, and they would share stuff, not download on me, but they felt kind of a sense of safety, a place of no judgment, a place that they were seen and heard without necessarily either one trying to fix the problem, or two being judged by the issues. But also it lies in my own individual narrative and my own personal story. So high level, again, I don't talk about this a lot, and it's not on my website, is my personal mission on this world is to eradicate loneliness for as many people as I can before I die. How do I do that? Well, my job is to help them connect to themselves, connect to meaningful work in this world that lights them and the world up, and connect to their loved ones, in this world. And part of that process, which I won't get into all the details in it, but is helping them understand the difference between their talents and their gifts, and bringing their talents and their gifts out to play and dance and play with them. But if you go back to my childhood, there was a lot of loneliness. So what I've done is I haven't just taken something out of the sky that sounds great. Oh, I'm going to eradicate loneliness for as many people as I can. That kind of sounds like a nice mission. Sure, I'll grab that. And that's the challenge for a lot of people who want to make an impact in the world, is they're doing something often. Sometimes they're not doing anything, but sometimes they're doing something that does bring the world forward. It makes the world a better place. But if you can align what it is that you have been either lacking or missing, or a part of your own personal pain, or a part of something that you yourself have a lived experience with, and align that to impact, there's almost like a nuclear fuel that goes on inside you that is when you hit a bad day, and we all have them, there's something kind of, you've got this tenacious depth because you're on a mission that is so big for you personally, but is bigger than you as well. So for me, that loneliness piece is, I don't want people to suffer from that. There is no need for that suffering. And I suffer that so I know it intimately. So I can therefore see it and experience it in others. And a lot of clients would say to me, no, loneliness is not something that I'm walking around the earth thinking I am. But when you break down their lives, they can be surrounded by 50 people in their office. They can literally lie next to someone in bed at night. They can have thousands of Twitter followers and Facebook followers. They can do it. And there's a loneliness because we haven't shown up in the world. We've almost abandoned ourselves. Loneliness shows up in so many different ways. So one of the greatest privileges for me is to eradicate that, or at least reduce that suffering for as many people as I can while I'm on this earth for a very short period of time, depending on your perspective on that, of course.
So I want to tug on that thread a bit more. I think this is important. It's an important conversation to have because today I look around the world, and even though the world seems smaller in terms of being able to connect with other people, information flow, etc., I think we are more lonely today than in other periods of history. And I'd be interested to find out if you would push back on me, if you agree, disagree. But before we get to that, you have said, and you're very well known for saying, that your greatest gift lies right next to your deepest wound. So your own personal suffering that allowed you to be able to discover your gifts and brought you to your soul's work, as you like to say, is this that pain, this loneliness, this is the impetus that allows you to do what you do today?
Yes, absolutely 100%. And I do agree with you 100% that whether we're lonelier now than we were 100 years ago, I'm not sure I'm qualified or know enough to say that. But would I say that we, despite all the so called connection and connection tools that we have, are we still a very lonely, distributed society? Yes, I would. And I hope that changes. But I actually don't hold out a lot of hope for that actually getting better as more and more and more technology and things like that, we're becoming so much more rewarded in society for our intellect rather than our emotion, and it's emotion that helps people connect, and it always has and it always will. So it's a really fine balance, and yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, well, first, thank you for sharing that. I think that's really important for us to remember and to better understand, because we talk about so many tools available today that are really tools that are supposed to connect us with more people. But emotion, what you just said, it does not provide or allow for human to human, heart to heart, soul to soul connection. And I think that is the missing component. And I'm wondering, based on your experience, do you see a difference in that level of loneliness in age groups, demographics? Is it across the board? Are you seeing it more often with a younger generation? Where are we experiencing that level of loneliness?
Everywhere, everywhere. Does it affect more segments of the populace? I'm sure it does. I don't break it down to that kind of nth degree. It doesn't really, that doesn't keep me awake at night, and it doesn't wake me up and give me excitement in the morning. To me, I see it in relationships. I see parents being lonely and feeling guilty and ashamed for even admitting the fact that there's a loneliness there, because we can be disconnected from ourselves and have, again, all these people around us. We can do work, but we're not doing our soul's work. So therefore there's a disconnection from ourselves. So I'm seeing it everywhere. I'm seeing it, young kids are lonely and disconnected from aspects of society, even their own parents, because their own parents are so busy doing the adult thing. It's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere, and it's becoming more and more prevalent. And there's not an aspect of society that I don't see it even, less or more. It's just absolutely everywhere, and it's in religion. It's in. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I deal with lots of people, and I can cite certain people, kind of one-off clients to impress, to try to impress your audience, which I wouldn't do because they're probably too smart and they'd see that bullshit a mile away. But like, you can have people, literally, I have a client who walks out in front of 70,000 fans screaming not just his team's name, but on occasion his name, and he can experience loneliness. And yet most people would look at him and go, no, he's the most connected of all the people, because he's got fans, he's got online fans, he's got a girlfriend, he's got whatever. Absolutely, he feels lonely. And there's not a place for that loneliness to necessarily be discussed without us being told or shamed or feeling inadequate about that. And it's there, and it's unfortunate and unnecessary to some extent as well.
So this is obviously something that you had to work through, and I can only assume, well, I don't even want to assume, but did you do a lot of deep work to learn how to move past those feelings? And if so, do you still feel lonely today? And if you do, what do you do about it in that moment?
Yeah, great questions. One thing I wanted to share before that is I'm not suggesting every busy person is lonely, but sometimes people think the antidote to loneliness is just busyness, and it's not busyness. So when people are super, super, super busy, often it's an indication that actually they're running or moving away from something.
Mm.
And to me, rather than me being the judge and jury, or you feeling I'm judging you if you're busy, that's not my goal or my wish. My goal or my wish is that you go away and you just ask yourself a better question. Go rather than saying, no, I'm busy for this reason, I'm busy for that reason. What if you just stop and ask yourself a really excellent question? Why am I so busy? Like, really, why am I so busy? And if you can begin to truly answer that question for yourself, you will be a better human being. Um, so for me personally, the discovery of loneliness wasn't something I was conscious of. It wasn't something that I walked around feeling, yet I felt it every single day. And I didn't feel I had the right to be lonely because on the surface of it, I had family, I had, siblings, I had some friends, I had, but there was an underlying loneliness to it all in many respects. I did a lot of deep work. I'll never forget the first day I went to therapy. And the very quick version of this story, I walked into this home in Ireland and the therapist, said I'd go get a cup of tea. And I walk in and there's two chairs at kind of right angles, and one had the biggest box of Kleenex I've ever seen in my life. It was like a coffee table. It was so big. And I sat, Jay, this is so naive of me. I sat in the other chair and I thought to myself, God, he must have a bad cold. It's a long time ago. And he walks in, he stops for the two cups of tea and he goes, Philip, you're sitting in my chair. And I get up and I walk and I sit in the other chair reluctantly. And I look down at the Kleenex and I look at him and I look at the Kleenex and I look at him. And there's that movie, I think what's the movie with, it doesn't matter where the guy says, you're not going to make me cry. It's a well-known movie with, show me the money. It doesn't matter. Your listeners will know it or not know it. And I looked at it and I subconsciously said to myself, there is no effing way. There is no effing way I'm going to be crying here. That is just not going to happen. I don't do that. You can't control me. I think he just looked at me and I took one sup of tea and he said, so tell me about your life. And I think within about 3 minutes, I was vibrating with anger. Anger I didn't even know that was in my body. And then the tears, and then the sadness, and then the anger. And the anger was a much safer place for me. And it's a much safer place for a lot of humans. And definitely a much safer place for a lot of men to hang out in. Because anger is a little bit more masculine, therefore accepted than sadness, which lies just behind that wall of anger. And I left that room, that house that day, and I'll never forget it. And it was the beginning. It literally was the beginning. Because up to that point, no matter what I did, no matter what I achieved, it was never enough. I couldn't get ahead. I didn't have clarity. Things were arduous, challenging, just challenging. I couldn't put my finger on it. And I left that house that day and I was so scared because I didn't realize I had so much emotion inside of me. So I've continued that journey on and off within myself, both from a therapeutic perspective, going to events, doing very little reading, not because I don't believe in reading. I'm dyslexic, so reading is a challenge. I try not to overstimulate myself intellectually. I don't read news. I don't listen to the to radio and news online or read it in papers. I'm very fortunate that I don't consume vast quantities of intellectual stimulus. And therefore, I think I haven't jammed my brain full of stuff that some of it, which is massively useful, and some of it is a complete waste of time and it's not my avenue. And yet, despite all of that work, despite all of that journey, there's still a loneliness that is present, and it's kind of ever present. And the minute I deny its existence is when it comes up and creeps up and bites me right in the ass, and I become complacent. So to me, that loneliness, because my child, my little Philip, is still inside me. I'm still a little boy. I'm still the adolescent. I'm still the teenager. I'm still the guy trying to figure shit out. I haven't changed. I've evolved. So there's always that little presence of loneliness. But here's the antidote to loneliness, as far as I'm aware, is alignment. It's actually aligning to who you are, falling in love with yourself, looking at yourself and finding a way, not bullshitting yourself, but finding a legitimate, true way to find parts of yourself, not just physically, but emotionally, that you're proud of. That you can wake up and say, I'm not the man, I'm the shit, like bullshitting yourself, I'm being arrogant. But you wake up and go, oh my God, this is, I'm okay. I'm not a bad person. I'm actually okay. And finding work that brings you alive, and therefore it brings you a depth and a sense of meaning and purpose in the world that I have. And I can't believe what I do. This wasn't part of some plan. This wasn't the vision board. I cannot believe what I do most days. I wake up and I go, is this the life I live? And it's challenging. And because I have such, and I'll finish with this, because I have such a desperate need and desire and want to raise and elevate humans in this world, that comes with a fairly significant price. Because a lot of people avoid me because they're afraid of me, because I represent nothing other than a part of who they are, a mirror, as you referred to earlier on. And some people will go, no, I've been avoiding you for 3 years. I go, but we don't know each other. I go, yeah, I read your book. I looked at you. You just scare the shit out of me. And I'm sensitive. I'm super sensitive. And therefore that hurts. Or people say, oh, my wife would love, or my husband would love to come and do one of your retreats with me, but they have no interest in meeting you. But I go, but they don't know me. And they see me as a threat. And if people actually knew me, Jay, I'm actually super sensitive. I think on occasion I'm funny. I have a good sense of humor. Not everyone agrees with that. I'm ruthless because I care. But I've got one of the biggest hearts in the world. And it saddens me sometimes when people don't give me a chance to experience that, to see no one will ever be able to question why I do what I do, the intentionality behind it. No one will ever be able to question that, ever. My methods are always on the chopping block and up for debate, because that's how I do it. But why I do it, I can assure you it is as pure can be. But there's a loneliness in that, because I'm on this earth for a mission. And I think there's a sacrifice that you pay when you dedicate the rest of your life to doing something like that.
Mm. Wow. That gives me chills as I'm thinking about this. I think that the most important relationship that we can have, first and foremost, is that relationship with ourselves. Part of having that relationship with ourselves is knowing ourselves. And that's the good, the bad, and the ugly. We all have our stuff. And I remember I'm a big proponent for therapy, self-discovery, looking for ways to improve and to look at our origin stories and really work through that so we can reach our potential and become the best version of ourselves and make the greatest impact that we personally can. But you have to be, I think, my own experience is you have to be open to it, right? You have to meet people where they are. We can't force that upon anyone. I know you don't do that. But when you hear somebody say that I've avoided you, or I'm scared to be in your presence because it may shine a light on something about myself that I don't want to know or I don't want to see, that to me is, I get it. It's shocking, though, at the same time. So Pablo Picasso said, this is a quote that you actually have on your website. It's a great quote and one that I love. He said that the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. So I would love it if you would share, we've been touching on this a little bit, but I would love it if you would share some of the ways that you're able to help other people connect with their truth and uncover their unique gifts so they can bring that to the world. And as we're talking about this, I want to tie this into one last talk, because I think there's an important correlation there. But I would love it if you would speak to that, finding our gifts why that's so important.
Yeah, I think it's critical. But you talked about readiness, and not everyone's ready. If I had a door and it said, "Come in and find your gift," and you were next to me down the corridor, and you had a door that said, "Come in and build $1 million business," and there was somebody else called Sarah, and she was further down the corridor, and she said, "Come in here and learn how to be a millionaire." Um, um, which door that the curiosity that brings you to which door tells you where you're at in that journey. And there's no judgment. It's like climbing the first mountain, climbing the second mountain. To me, there's always that third mountain, which is often it's not even visible to the naked eye. And it's about, not everybody's is ready for my work. They're just not. But there's a readiness that becomes available. And what's interesting is many of the people who've been avoiding me come back to me. They come back 2 or 3 years later and they say, I've been avoiding you, and there was something you said that stirred me up, and it was more about me than it was about you, and they're ready for the work right now. But getting onto our gifts, I often cite the poor accountants get a hard time. My wife's an accountant, so it's a kind of an easy target. But she was very good with numbers, and her career guidance person said she was good with numbers, and she put two and two together, and no disrespect, came up with five, not four, and she made assumptions along the way, like many of us do, that if I can make enough money, I can create some freedom, and with that freedom and money, I can then go and do what I want. I'll have choice. And on the surface of it, it sounds great, and I don't think most people would intellectually argue that. In fact, that's the story I had for most of my life. But what her maths equation and her assumptions didn't account for is, was she destined to be an accountant? And did that bring her joy? Did it light her up? And is there something as a result of pursuing that avenue that she didn't explore, some type of different expression in the world, whether it's artistry or otherwise? And to me, some of the greatest artists, musicians, and humans die with their greatest music still inside them, even the ones that we refer to as the best, because often they have a song or a piece of art or a painting that they're afraid to paint because they're afraid of what humanity will think of them. Or, put it a different way, it is the essence of who they are. So they'd rather run the risk of failing painting something like, say, a landscape that they're drawn to, but they're not deeply drawn to, than painting something that's slightly almost more abstract and spiritual, because they're afraid the world won't want that. I had an artist last week who did a one-to-one coaching call with me, and this poor lady, just all she wants to do is paint. And she was saying, well, what's wrong? Like, why isn't it working? And as we got into it, she keeps pivoting, and this word pivot seems to have been born out of COVID, and I understand it. There's been pivoting that's been required, but most people keep pivoting to try to accommodate societal expectations of who they should be and how they should act. And this woman wants to paint this, but she's painting that because the market is saying this is what we want. I'm saying to her, I don't give a shit what the market wants. I don't give a shit what the market. If you are not painting what you are on this earth to paint, you're going to die. Even if your paintings sell. In other words, it will not work or it will not matter. And I said, maybe there's ways in which you can show up differently. Maybe you could be the little artist rebel who basically says, I'm going to hold space and teach you how to uncover what it is that you want to paint and how to paint. And she goes, I never thought about that. I said, exactly. When you open up to what our gifts are, there are ways in which we can show up in the world using our gifts. The goal should never be, hey, I want to uncover my gift and I want to monetize it, and go, whoa, hang on a second. That's like saying, I want to meet a girl or a guy tonight and I want to have babies with them. Like, before you even go out the door, before you even leave the building, why would you put that expectation on yourself? Never mind your gift. The gift is something that we have been given. It is innately inside us. It is something that most people die with, unfortunately. And it is taken away if we do not use it, and it is passed to somebody else. But it is there. It is ever present. And another way of describing it, Jen, I see this all the time. People will have something they do right now, and perhaps they're not that happy doing it. And they have an idea of what's next, whether it's a business, a job, or whatever. But what I'm intrigued about is, what's the idea in your back pocket that you don't share with anybody, that you don't talk about, that you don't think you're capable of doing, that you don't think the world wants? Everybody has it. Everybody has it. And I have sat in front of people up to recently going, I know you have this business, and I know you want to do some, but what's the idea in the back pocket? And the minute you get close, here's what happens. People go, oh, it's just this little thing. It's not, it's not that complex, Philip. In other words, they downplay it, they diminish it, which tells you you're getting close. Why do they do that? If I'm going to use just a silly, it might even come across as deeply sexist, but that's not my intent. You walk into a bar and there's two women sitting at the bar. It could be men as well. And the woman on the right, you've loved her for 25 goddamn years. And for whatever reason, it just has never shown up for you to ask her out or her ask you out, but you've loved this woman since you were kids. And she's recently befriended somebody who's sitting on the left. And they're chatting, and the girl on the left is lovely, and you think she's nice, and you're attracted to her, whatever. Most people, if they're honest, would probably walk up and ask the girl on the left out. Because if she says no, it's not going to destroy you. But if the person on the right says no, there's almost nothing left. Is our perception. There's nothing but the darkest, blackest hole, which has no ending, and you're going to free fall into that. So why run the risk of failing doing what you're destined to be here? My argument is, why not run the risk? Because whatever perceptions you have of failure, if you don't pursue it, you're failing yourself and betraying yourself every single day. And it's the people, you mentioned one last talk. One last talk to me is such a profound concept, not because of me, but because of the men and women who have stood on any stage in the world and shared their one last talk. But why it's most of them will have come given the opportunity, and they have a talk that they think the world wants, but then they have a talk inside them that they don't want the world to hear necessarily at the beginning, and it's what the world needs. And to me, that's a representative or a glimpse into the possibilities that we have. And some of those men and women have said to me, "Oh, I'm not a storyteller. I'm not a speaker." Some of the best speakers I have ever laid eyes on. I speak professionally. I go to events and I speak. And I'm telling you one thing: some of these one last talk speakers who have never spoken before, and some of them never since, would wipe the floor with me as a speaker, because their story and the purity of it and the authenticity of it is so beautiful. And we all have that inside of us. And my job is to help people awaken to that possibility. And when they do, it's magic to see what happens for them and everyone around them.
So I've listened to a number of the One Last Talks, and they are so incredibly moving. And I listen to the message, I listen to the story, to the emotion that's being delivered and felt. But I'm also trying to get the perspective of the individual who is standing on that stage, who is not a, quote, professional speaker, but who had the courage to be able to take that story that they've never told before, but was important to tell without the fear of judgment, and to be able to deliver that in a way that just lands and resonates and teaches some incredibly valuable lessons. It really is an amazing experience to witness. I haven't been to one in person, but I would encourage everyone that's watching and listening right now, and I'll provide links in the show notes, to listen to some of the One Last Talks, and of course to purchase a copy of the book itself. So Philip, if you could just very briefly give us an overview of the One Last Talk book, what our audience can expect when they purchase a copy of that, how it can help them, and how it can help them be able to create and curate their story so they can share it.
Yeah. We've brought it into lots of different environments, public environments where we've had public live events. I brought them into organizations where we've had 3 or 4 men and women deliver a one last talk in front of their entire organization. And what it does is it simply helps them connect as a unit, as a company, as an organization, through the lens of one thing, something that we're all a lot more familiar with in recent terms, and that is vulnerability. But I would say that the challenge with vulnerability is it's now being seen as a tool and as a mechanism in which people can use vulnerability to connect. That is a very fine line between manipulation and something being very organic. So one last talk essentially allows the reader to understand why their story matters in perhaps a way that they haven't thought about to date. So if I asked your listeners to think about giving a one last talk and standing on the stage in front of one person or 1,000 people, it doesn't matter about the details, and delivering their one last talk, what happens in your brain? Do you go to Jesus, I don't have a one last talk. Now my friend Jay, oh my God, I must get him a one last talk book because wow, his story is amazing. Two, do you go, oh yeah, I'd love to do a talk about global warming, or the political landscape in North America, or the education system, or whatever? No, that's not what a one last talk is. One last talk is about your personal story, your personal narrative. Now we have another batch of I don't mean batch as in, to dehumanize people, but another batch of your listeners now and in the future going, oh, my story. Oh, geez, my story's not that great. I mean, I just grew up in Boston. I was a son or a daughter of a teacher. My life wasn't that exciting. Bullshit. Every single person that I've ever worked with who told me that, by the time they get on that stage, they have a story that's not just worth loving, but it's worth teaching, or it's worth sharing with the world. And then other people who go, oh my God, my tragedy my trauma is so deep. I don't think I'm able, and I don't think the world wants to hear it. And what's lovely about that is if you share your story and someone else hears their story that relates to yours in some way, shape, or form, that mirrors aspects of yours, two things happen. One is they go, God, well, her story matters. It immediately invites you to contemplate, therefore, well, maybe your story matters. And if my story matters, then maybe I'll tell my story. There is no greater gift we've been given than the story that we've lived. Yet most people, one, have not really truly mined it, like really gone into it and understood it. Secondly, is a lot of us would rather have lived a different story. Or three, we'd rather have lived, I don't know, chapter 1 to 8 is great, Jay, but chapter 9 and 10, I mean, God, if I could just eject that out of my body, out of my psyche, out of my soul, and then 11, 12, 13, oh, my 14 is amazing. And it's those two chapters that we've eliminated from our consciousness that we don't want to revisit. Actually, it often holds the very gold that is the thing that's missing in our lives today. In other words, it often is the signpost. So you have two options: either live with the story and embrace the story and share the story and own your story and love your story and see its purpose, or two, spend the rest of your life running from it. Good luck with that, whichever choice you want. But I assure you, there's not a human walking this earth that doesn't have a story that will help other people heal and accept who they are. Therefore, our stories are the most important asset that we have. It's not time, because you can have all the time in the world, but if you don't know how to use it, if you're not capable of living it, if you don't feel deserving of it, if you don't make it meaningful, if you don't cover your gift, you will die later in your life and you will wonder. And the stats say that 90% of people die with major life regrets. Nowhere does the science say 90% of stupid people. I don't think there's such thing as stupid people. People who do stupid things, perhaps, but not stupid people. We're all deeply smart. We don't wake up saying, I'm going to make a decision today that I'm going to regret in 40 years from now. But many of us wake up today making decisions that bring us just slightly out of alignment with who we are, because we're too busy listening to society. We're not busy enough trusting our own intuition and ourselves. And before you know it, you look back in 10 years from now and you go, what just happened? Where are the kids? Why don't I talk to my wife? What's going on? Why am I not making enough money? How did I open this business? We're living life kind of unconsciously. And we're judging the crap out of ourselves, and we don't like who we are, many of us. And I think your story has such an opportunity to embrace who we are and to live into who we are. And once you fall in love with the story you've lived, it's a lot easier to begin to live a story that you can like moving forward in this world. There's some deep correlation that I haven't fully figured out.
Gosh, I love this so much. Philip, what is one of the most valuable lessons that you've learned from someone who has given a one last talk?
Oh, what a great question. You know what? It's unfair for me to necessarily cite one. Actually, I'm going to cite one that no one really knows because it's so buried that the talks have never been released. I was going to give you one that's about parenting, but I'm going to give you one that I was very fortunate to be invited to go into the prison system in the United States and to volunteer my time to work with inmates who have chosen to rehabilitate and have demonstrated a desire to reconcile what they've done in order to be imprisoned. So if they ever get out, that they can move into society and make the world a better place in some way, shape, or form. And I've eyeballed many of these, and some of it is that the journey is very sincere, and others are choosing to take on that journey because they want to use it as an opportunity to perhaps get out early, etc. But I had a vision that I wanted to bring a one last talk into the prison system, and I was told I probably wouldn't be able to do it. I said, before you continue telling me what I can't do, I'm going to bring in an audience from the outside and we're going to record all the talks. And we achieved all three. They've never been published. Most people don't even know I have them. But one of the greatest lessons I've ever learned is there was a man who committed some pretty serious sex offenses in society. And I would have been guilty myself of judging these men from afar and writing them off. And I'm not here to defend what they did, but to through the one last talk process, what we did was we gave them an opportunity to share their story and allow the audience to decipher what they wanted from it. But rather than me telling you what I think happened in that talk, let me just give you one fact that was staggering. There happened to be two women in the room. This was a public audience that we brought in, invited them in. They knew what they were going in for. They didn't know the talks. No one knew what was going to happen except for me. And even I knew what was going to happen because I helped these men craft their talks. We had 50 inmates were the other side of the audience. We, let's just say we had 100. It wasn't quite 100, but let's just say we had 50 inmates in the audience, 50 public. And in that 50, there was two women who had been sexually abused. And when the man started to talk, he didn't justify and rationalize his behavior. In fact, he was very clear that what he did was wrong. But he just simply shared his story. And at the end of that talk, one of the women got up and walked straight up to him and hugged him. And you're not allowed to actually have any physical engagement. So obviously it was a short hug. And she cried in front of him and she said, I don't want you to go back to the main population because having admitted that he was a sex offender, it was the first time he admitted it in front of the audience and in front of the inmates. There's a strong likelihood that he will be hurt. And she said to her husband, I want to protect him. I don't want him to go back. And her husband was in shock. He just turned to me and said, I've been trying to get her to go to therapy and work on this for years. And here's my wife confronted with somebody who's been essentially convicted for something that has touched her life in some way, shape, or form. And all she has is for him is compassion. All she has is compassion. And it was the most extraordinary engagement I'd ever seen in a one last talk environment. And it's like what I would say is when you understand, there's no such thing, no one was ever born an asshole. Now, I know some people disagree with that. But when you understand someone's story, it doesn't negate their behavior, but what it does is it gives you insight into how they became who they were and how they became, the asshole, if that's the right term, because it's a form of defense. And, I don't have the power to bring one last talk into every prison in the country. I don't have the power to bring one last talk into every organization. I don't have the power to ask everyone to do a one last talk. But if we did, the healing that would happen from that, it has brought nothing but healing. in my personal humble experience, both self and healing of others, and healing between the people that have hurt us in our stories and ourselves. So it's been one of the greatest gifts, and yet it's a very challenging concept from a commercial standpoint. We try to make it work. We try to launch it. We had in 12 cities before COVID around the world, and then COVID, did its thing. Um, One Last Talk right now is something I just want to gift to the world. I don't want to commercialize it necessarily. I want to gift it to the world. I want people to use it. I see therapists using it. I see organizations using it. But there is no greater tool, I believe, that I've come across that can help people connect as long as they just follow the book and go through the process, and deliver their one last talk without any need to looking good and or an expectation of how they may be perceived or received beyond that. Just do the process, and the rest will look after itself. So that's my story around one last talk.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a very powerful story in and of itself. And all of you that are watching and listening, again, I would highly encourage you to not only re-listen to this episode, because there is just a tremendous amount of value and insight that Philip has shared. One last talk, I remember, Philip may not remember this, but about 4 years ago, I want to say it was about 4 years ago, I was in a Zoom conference with Philip and listening to him talk about One Last Talk. And it just, you've heard some of what was shared, but it just really, it shook me. It just shook me to my core. I can't explain it any other way. And it filled me with just a sense of emotion and need to be able to figure out a way to help amplify this message and this story and this book, and why it's so important. So again, for all of you, please do yourself a favor, purchase a copy of this book, listen to some of the One Last Talks, and find a way to tell your story. It's in there. It's deep in there. But you have the ability to change someone else's life, and through storytelling. So thank you for that, Philip. As we're wrapping up, I would be remiss if we didn't briefly talk about gratitude. Share with us, we talk about gratitude today. I'm grateful every single day for taking my first breath, right? I mean, I can list off all the reasons why I'm grateful. I keep a gratitude journal. I write every single morning. Speak to what happens when gratitude can actually hold us back. What is the dark side of gratitude?
Yeah, I think gratitude can blind us because what it does is we're too busy being grateful that we don't see, the reality for what it is. So let's go back. We started with our story, and I don't want to make all of the work and all of it on hinging on going back into your past because that's just one aspect of what we believe to understand who you are, and then a lot of our work is today and then moving forward in terms of making a bigger impact in the world. But let's imagine that you have a series of patterns in your life that some of which you're aware of and some of which you're not aware of. And now let's just say some of those patterns you learned from your parents. Okay. And they're learned behaviors. They were so integrated, you're not even conscious of picking them up from your parents, whether it's around money, success, intimacy, relationships, whatever it happens to be. And here we are 30, 40, 50 years later, and you keep bumping up against this same kind of the pattern, the circumstances change, but essentially we're still talking about the same thing emerging. You finding yourself getting blindsided, people letting you down, and you go, that guy's an asshole, that guy's a day, whatever. And you go, well, but the common denominator is you. How are you creating this, call it sabotage, or these loops? What is your part in this? Well, I don't know. I mean, I have no idea what it is. Well, where did you learn that? Oh no, I'm so grateful for my childhood. And I go, no, I know you are, but like, tell me about your dad. Oh, my dad was amazing. I'm so grateful for him. And I go, I know you're grateful for him, but was he perfect? Well, he wasn't perfect, but even what he did that didn't serve me, I'm really grateful for that. It may be hard, it's maybe whatever. So that person is determined to find gratitude in everything. When what real courage is when you stop and go, my dad was great and I love him and I am grateful overall. But there are moments and there are periods and there are behaviors and there are things that were said, there were things that were not said that simply did not serve me and do not serve me. And if we can't isolate the behavior, then we can't do the learning, we can't do the growing, we can't do the dissolving, we can't integrate that behavior because you're too busy being smothering that story with gratitude, which isn't even real. It's not all real. There are aspects of it. So I think gratitude is a phenomenal thing. I jokingly, not jokingly, sometimes say that some of the angriest people in the world are yoga teachers. So to me, gratitude, yoga, meditation, etc., are incredible tools. They're spiritual extensions and invitations. They're not even tools. But we shouldn't be using these things to mask over dysfunctionality or charged emotions or things that don't serve us. These things are available to us so we can enhance our journey in this world. So I encourage people to be grateful, to find time to be grateful, and to do it in their lives daily, weekly, monthly, absolutely. But have the courage to also and equally stop and go, what's not working? What hasn't worked? What hasn't served me? Where am I not showing up? Where can I make tweaks and improvements? And being constantly grateful for everything in your life doesn't serve. And I'll give you a quick example. I was doing a retreat a few years ago and I had a man and woman sit in front of me, and this woman refused to see that she had stuff in her childhood, her background, that didn't serve her. She goes, "Oh, Philip, I had a great childhood." And I said, "It was perfect." She said, "Yeah, pretty much. My dad's incredible." Her husband was sitting next to her, right? He was unbelievable, just incredible man. And I said, so, but if you, and I'm not here to vilify or find holes, but I just know human behavior is that there is not a human in this world that hasn't had, in some way, shape, or form, a tough, trauma-based background, history, childhood. There's always trauma. It's just whether we can see it or whether it deserves to be named in societal terms. That's a different conversation. But here's a woman who refused, like point blank refused to see any subtleties, nuances of a dysfunctional, human, flawed father, because that's what we all are ultimately at some level. And here's where the magic came in. I said, so eventually, I said, basically what you're saying is your dad is perfect. She says, pretty much. I said, wow, how does any man ever live up to that? And the man sitting to her left, her husband, just burst into tears. I mean, shockingly, as in he was embarrassed and ashamed and shocked. He didn't start to cry, he just exploded into tears. And she stopped and looked at him. And what she didn't understand that she was doing was she was putting her father on a pedestal. No one deserves to be on a pedestal. No one, no human deserves the right to be on a pedestal. Because the dynamic what you've created is they're better than me. And no one gets to come into my life until they can emulate that. And my experience is no one sitting on that pedestal actually deserves it. And what you'll find is when she finally saw the devastation in her husband, she said, well, okay, my dad used to get pretty angry. So I'm not saying he was totally perfect. And he's looking at her in shock and go, what do you mean? Well, he used to get really angry a lot and whatever, but I didn't see that as bad. And what would you do? I'd go to my room and I'd just isolate myself. And he goes, oh, that's why you don't talk when we fight. You just disappear. It turns out that her dad wasn't perfect. So some of your listeners might be going, okay, I get how the husband benefited from this. No. She saw her father's humanity. So therefore, her expectations of her own husband and her children and herself reduced a little bit. So everyone could breathe. They were going, oh, you mean I don't have to be perfect around her? Now you might be left saying, oh, but then you just vilified her father and created a distance. No, she got to see him for who he actually was. And she was able to have some conversations to heal, to actually create a legitimately deeper relationship rather than a false relationship that she'd been holding for 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years. That's just one insight into how not diminishing somebody, but seeing the truth for what it actually is changes everything. Last one, I know we're running out of time, very quickly. One last talk. Bev Atke was the very first one last talk. Her her son committed suicide. She had one other son. She lost both her sons that day. One took his life, and she didn't know how to connect with the other. After she did a one last talk, she said to me, I got my other son back, because she was able to forgive herself through that process for any type of self-blame that she had for her own life, and therefore opened her heart to her other boy that she was afraid of losing. She didn't know that she'd blocked him out. She didn't know how to connect with him. She was scared shitless that she'd lose him as well. And she shamed and blamed herself for years. So that's how our past and how our stories integrate and collide in such a magical, magical, magical way. It is all we have, ultimately. So why abandon it? Why leave it in the past? Bring it with you. Bathe in it, meditate in it, be grateful, be an examiner of it. Don't judge it, and then look for ways in which you can begin to change the script and change the chapters as you move forward, and fall down your knees and pick yourself up again and move forward. That is the power of our story, and I think it's something I believe wholeheartedly in.
Wow. So powerful. Thank you. You're starting to tear up because I actually did listen to that particular very first talk, and it is incredibly emotional. I cried as she was telling that story. So, Philip, my final question to you, what is one of the greatest gifts that life has given you that you didn't realize at the time?
An ability to see people, to really, really see them, to feel them and to hear them. Um, and also to see beyond that, to see what's possible for people. Not to say they should do what I say, because I don't tell them what to do, but I have the ability to work with people and see what's actually possible for them when they are unwilling or unable to do it for themselves. And that is a gift that is both light and very heavy at the same time.
Thank you for sharing that. And Philip, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. I certainly appreciate your humanity, your clarity, your ability to just tell it like it is and share your wisdom with all of us. I truly am grateful for that in a good way. I appreciate you. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Well, it's only with people like you who give me an opportunity and a voice to do so. So I appreciate you, and thank you for the lovely care that you held the space today with, and we'll connect again soon.
Absolutely. It is my honor. And for all of you, thank you so very much for watching and listening. And I do have a very quick favor. Would you please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts? That helps us expand our reach and attract amazing guests just like Philip McKernan. And to listen to more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button, and until next time, keep learning and keep growing. Make sure you visit Philip's website, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat.